The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stood before my parents in their pristine living room. The crystal clinked against my engagement ring, a sound that would haunt them for years to come. I have an announcement to make. My mother's perfectly manicured fingers paused mid-air above her teacup. My father lowered his financial newspaper, those calculating eyes already sensing something had shifted in the family dynamic. They thought they knew what was coming. They thought they had won. "Finally come to your senses about David," my mother asked, that practiced smile spreading across her Botoxed features. "I told you that silly rebellious phase would pass." The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. 3 months ago, they had cornered me in this very room, presenting their ultimatum like a business contract. Marry David Harrison, my college ex-boyfriend, or watch the family empire crumble without my inheritance. Their logic was flawless, they believed. David's family owned the second-largest construction firm in the state. A merger through marriage would cement their dominance. "Actually," I said, my voice steady as steel, "I'm engaged." My father's chest puffed with satisfaction. "Excellent. David's a good match. When's the wedding?" The moment stretched like a wire about to snap. I lifted my left hand, letting the light catch the enormous emerald surrounded by diamonds. A ring worth more than most people's cars. A ring that carried a name my parents would recognize instantly. To Alexander Kane. The newspaper crumpled in my father's hands. My mother's teacup shattered against the marble floor. The silence that followed could have suffocated empires. Alexander Kane, the name that had poisoned dinner conversations for 15 years. The heir to Kane Industries, the construction conglomerate that had systematically dismantled my family's market share project by project, contract by contract. The golden boy whose father had stolen 3 major government deals from us in the past year alone. "That's not funny, Sarah," my father whispered, his face draining of color. "I'm not laughing." My mother shot to her feet, her pristine composure cracking like ice. "You cannot be serious. That family has been trying to destroy us for decades. And now I'm going to help them finish the job." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. My father stood slowly, his hands shaking with rage. This was the man who had taught me that business was war and family was everything. Today he would learn that sometimes those two principles destroy each other. "You ungrateful little bitch," he breathed. I had never heard him speak to me that way. 26 years of being daddy's little princess, and it took one engagement announcement to reveal what I really was to him: an asset, a bargaining chip, a means to an end. "How long?" my mother demanded, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "How long have you been seeing him behind our backs?" The truth was more beautiful than fiction. I met Alexander Kane 3 weeks after my parents' ultimatum. Not in some clandestine business meeting or society function, but in a coffee shop at 6 in the morning when I couldn't sleep and needed somewhere to think. He was sitting alone at a corner table, still in running clothes, staring at his laptop screen with the kind of focused intensity that made the air around him vibrate with purpose. I recognized him immediately. His face had graced enough business magazines and society pages that avoiding him would have been impossible in our circles. But that morning, he just looked tired, human, vulnerable in a way that the tabloids never captured. I bought him a coffee. Colombian dark roast, no sugar. He looked up when I set it down, those infamous green eyes meeting mine with surprise and something else. Recognition that went deeper than business rivalries and family feuds. "You're Sarah Morrison," he said. "And you're Alexander Kane. This is probably a bad idea." Probably. We talked until the coffee shop closed. Then we walked through the city until sunrise painted the buildings gold. By the time he kissed me on the steps of the cathedral downtown, I knew my life had just split into before and after. 6 weeks, I told my parents. We've been together for 6 weeks. My father's laugh was sharp and bitter. 6 weeks? You're willing to throw away 26 years of family loyalty for a 6-week fling with our greatest enemy? It's not a fling. I held up my ring again, watching the emerald catch the light. He proposed last night. The ring had belonged to Alexander's grandmother, a woman who had built Kane Industries from nothing after her husband died in World War II. She had worn it while negotiating with presidents and prime ministers, while raising 4 children alone, while creating an empire that would outlast her by generations. She would have liked you, Alexander had whispered when he slipped it onto my finger. She never backed down from a fight either. This is about revenge, isn't it? My mother said, her voice cracking with desperation. You're still angry about David. The accusation stung because part of it was true. David Harrison, my college boyfriend who had supposedly loved me, had revealed his true colors during that family meeting 3 months ago. He sat there nodding while my parents outlined their business arrangement, agreeing to the marriage like I was a prize cow being traded between farmers. The Morrison girl comes with significant assets, my father had explained to David as if I wasn't sitting right there. Full partnership in the company upon marriage, it's a generous dowry. David had smiled. The Harrisons are prepared to proceed with the engagement immediately. Neither of them had asked what I wanted. Neither had bothered to check if I was even willing to participate in their medieval business transaction. This isn't about David, I said now, my voice cutting through my mother's sob. This is about you treating me like property. You are ungrateful, my father spat, his composure completely shattered. Everything you have, everything you are, comes from this family. The clothes on your back, the car you drive, the degree you bought with our money. Then you won't mind if I give it all back. The threat landed like a physical blow. My father stumbled backward, gripping the edge of his leather chair. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I had 30% ownership in Morrison Construction, a stake my grandfather had left me in his will, legally binding and completely beyond my parents' control. Without my shares, they couldn't make the strategic decisions needed to compete with Kane Industries. Without my cooperation, their empire would slowly crumble under the weight of its own bureaucracy. You see, I continued, savoring every word. Alexander and I had a very interesting conversation about business last night, after he proposed. My mother made a choking sound. You discussed business on the night you got engaged. We're very practical people. The memory of that conversation still sent shivers down my spine. Not because it was cold or calculating, but because it was the first time someone had treated me as an equal. Alexander hadn't tried to protect me from the harsh realities of corporate warfare. He hadn't patronized me or suggested I didn't understand the implications of our relationship. Instead, he had laid out the situation with brutal honesty. Our marriage would create the largest construction conglomerate on the East Coast. Our combined companies would have enough government contracts to influence infrastructure policy for decades. The Morrison-Kane alliance would reshape the industry. But more importantly, he had said, his hands gentle on my face, it means no one will ever be able to use you as a pawn again. What did you discuss? My father demanded, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. Mergers and acquisitions, market consolidation, the usual pillow talk between two people in love. My father's face went white. Sarah, you cannot do this to your own family. You did this to yourselves. The words came out harder than I intended, but they needed to be said. You taught me that business is war. You taught me that family is everything. You just never imagined I might use those lessons against you. The room fell silent except for my mother's quiet weeping. She had collapsed onto the Italian leather sofa, her perfect makeup streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. This was the woman who had raised me to be strong, independent, capable of anything. She just never expected me to be capable of this. There's still time, my father said quietly, his voice taking on the desperate edge I had heard him use only once before, when the company nearly went bankrupt during the recession. Call it off, marry David, we can pretend this never happened. David can marry himself. My phone buzzed with a text message. Alexander, checking on me like he had every hour since I left his penthouse that morning. His support was a lifeline in the storm of family destruction I was creating. How are you holding up? The message read. Still breathing, I typed back. Good. Remember what we discussed. You don't owe them anything. He was right, but knowing that didn't make this easier. Destroying your own family, even when they deserve it, feels like tearing yourself apart from the inside. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," my mother said through her tears. "No," I replied, slipping my phone back into my purse. "The biggest mistake of my life was waiting so long to make it." I walked toward the door, then paused. One last gift for the people who had given me life and 26 years of suffocating expectations. "Oh, and the wedding is next month. You're not invited." I left them there, broken and betrayed, surrounded by the ruins of their grand plan. The click of my heels on their marble foyer echoed like gunshots. Outside, the world looked different. The sun was brighter, the air tasted cleaner. Freedom, it turned out, had a flavor all its own. My phone rang as I reached my car. Alexander's name lit up the screen like a beacon. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "About as well as expected." I slipped behind the wheel of my BMW, a car my father had bought me for my college graduation. Soon, I would need to decide whether to keep it or buy my own. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but the concern behind it was the difference between Alexander and everyone else in my life. He wanted to know if I was hurt, not whether I had accomplished his objectives or served his interests. "I will be," I said honestly. "Can you meet me at the pier?" "Already on my way." The pier was our place, where we had shared our first real conversation about something other than business or family drama. Where he had told me about his own struggles with family expectations and the weight of inheriting an empire built on his grandmother's blood and sweat. "Sometimes I wonder if she would be proud of what we've become," he had confessed that day, staring out at the water. "Or if she would think we've grown soft, forgotten what it means to fight for everything." "You haven't grown soft," I had assured him. "You just learned to fight for different things." Now, driving toward that same pier, I understood what I had really meant. We were fighting for the right to choose our own battles instead of inheriting other people's wars. Alexander was waiting for me when I arrived, leaning against his Aston Martin with a casual elegance that made photographers follow him around like lost puppies. But when he saw my face, the practiced charm disappeared, replaced by something raw and protective. "Come here," he said simply. I fell into his arms and finally let myself cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. The weight I had been carrying for months, the suffocating pressure of being perfect and obedient and grateful, lifted off my shoulders like steam. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "I know that probably doesn't mean much right now, but I wanted you to know. It means everything." We stood there for a long time, holding each other while the waves crashed against the pier. Around us, the city hummed with the noise of 8 million people living their lives, chasing their dreams, making their own choices. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged among them instead of above them. "What happens now?" I asked eventually. "Now we plan a wedding." His smile was warm and dangerous. "And a honeymoon that doubles as a business merger." The future stretched ahead of us like an unwritten book. There would be lawsuits probably, family feuds that would make the tabloids wealthy, board meetings where my father and Alexander's father would sit across from each other, united only in their mutual hatred and grudging respect. But there would also be love, real love, built on choice instead of obligation, and there would be power. The kind of power that came from refusing to be anyone's pawn, even when the board belonged to your own family. My phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was David. "Your parents told me what happened," the text read. "This is a mistake, Sarah. Call me." I showed Alexander the message. His expression darkened with protective fury. "What do you want me to do about it?" he asked. "Nothing." I deleted the message without responding. David Harrison is yesterday's news. "And what am I?" "You're tomorrow." I kissed him, tasting salt air and freedom and the possibility of writing my own story. "You're every tomorrow I choose for myself." 3 weeks later, we were married in Alexander's family chapel, surrounded by his relatives and my few friends who had been brave enough to defy my parents' declaration of war. The ceremony was beautiful and simple and entirely ours. My parents didn't attend as promised, but they sent a law firm. 3 attorneys in expensive suits served our wedding party with papers demanding the dissolution of our marriage on grounds of corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. Alexander and I signed the papers during our first dance, using each other's backs as writing surfaces while our guests cheered. The photographers had a field day. 6 months later, Morrison Construction was hemorrhaging contracts to Kane Industries. My 30% stake, now controlled by my husband through our marriage, had neutered my parents' ability to make competitive bids. They were bleeding money and market share with every passing quarter. My father called me on our 6-month anniversary. "Are you happy now?" he asked without preamble. "Watching your family business die?" "I'm happy," I said honestly, "but not because you're failing." "Then come home. Help us fight back. This doesn't have to destroy everything we built." The offer was tempting in ways he couldn't understand. Part of me missed the family dinners and holiday traditions. Part of me wanted to be the daughter who saved the day instead of the one who caused the disaster. But a larger part of me remembered that family dinner where they had presented me with a marriage contract like I was livestock being traded at market. That part of me felt no sympathy for their current problems. "You should call Alexander," I suggested. "Maybe you can work something out." "I'm calling you." "I'm not the decision maker anymore, Dad, I'm just his wife." The lie tasted bitter, but it served its purpose. I was actually Kane Industries' Executive Vice President of Strategic Development, a role that let me help design the corporate strategies that were systematically dismantling my father's empire. Alexander had offered me the position on our wedding night. "I want you as my partner in everything," he had said. "But I need to know you're here because you want to be, not because you're trying to prove something to your family." "I want to be here," I had assured him, "but I also want to earn my place." 6 months of 12-hour days and brutal negotiations had proven I belonged in that boardroom. The Morrison name had opened doors, but Kane training had taught me how to walk through them with confidence. "Sarah," my father's voice cracked with something that might have been genuine emotion. "Please, we're family." "No," I said gently, "we're former business partners." I hung up and deleted his number from my phone. Some bridges were meant to be burned completely. Alexander found me an hour later, standing in our penthouse kitchen, staring out at the city lights. "Rough call?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "My father wants to negotiate. Do you want to consider it?" The question was honest, without judgment or pressure. Alexander would support whatever decision I made, even if it meant helping my family compete against his company. That trust was more valuable than any inheritance my parents could have offered. "He had his chance to negotiate," I said, leaning back against my husband's chest, "when he decided to auction me off to the highest bidder. And now? Now we finish what we started." The moral weight of destroying your own family's legacy should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like justice. My parents had taught me that business was war and family was everything. They just never imagined I might conclude that they couldn't be both. 2 years later, Morrison Construction filed for bankruptcy. The business my grandfather had built from nothing, that my father had grown into a regional powerhouse, dissolved into legal paperwork and unpaid debts. Alexander and I bought the assets at auction for 60 cents on the dollar. My mother sent a single text message after the sale was finalized. "I hope destroying us was worth it." I never replied, but the answer was simple. It wasn't about destroying them, it was about refusing to be destroyed myself. Kane Industries, now Morrison Kane Development, became the largest construction company on the East Coast. We built hospitals and schools and affordable housing projects that would outlast all of us. We created jobs for thousands of people and infrastructure that would serve millions. And every morning I woke up next to a man who had chosen me for who I was, not what I represented on a balance sheet. 5 years after my wedding announcement in my parents' living room, I received an invitation to my cousin Rebecca's engagement party. My parents would be there, along with most of my extended family. The invitation was a peace offering, or maybe a challenge. "Do you want to go?" Alexander asked, reading the invitation over my shoulder. "I think so." "Are you ready for that?" The question required honest consideration. 5 years had softened some of the sharp edges of my anger, but they hadn't erased them. My parents had never apologized for treating me like property. They had never acknowledged that their business arrangements disguised as family loyalty had been fundamentally wrong. But they were still my parents, and I was tired of carrying the weight of their disappointment around like a stone in my chest. "I'm ready to find out," I said finally. The engagement party was held at the country club where I had learned to swim and play tennis and pretend that money could insulate you from the messier parts of life. Walking through those familiar rooms with Alexander beside me felt surreal, like revisiting a past that belonged to someone else. My parents were holding court near the bar, surrounded by relatives and family friends who had always treated them like minor royalty. They looked older, more tired, diminished somehow by the loss of their empire and their eldest daughter. My mother saw me first. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, time stopped. Then she smiled. Not the practiced society smile I remembered, but something smaller and sadder and real. She walked over slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Hello, Sarah." "Mom. You look beautiful." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. "Marriage agrees with you." "It does." My father joined us, moving with the careful dignity of a man who had lost most battles but refused to surrender the war. "Alexander," he said, extending his hand to my husband, "you've built an impressive company." "Thank you, sir." Alexander shook his hand without warmth, but without hostility either. "You built the foundation we expanded on." It was a generous acknowledgement, and I watched my father's shoulders relax slightly at the recognition. "I suppose we should talk," my mother said, glancing between Alexander and me. "All of us." We found a quiet corner of the club's library, away from the party noise and curious relatives. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my father cleared his throat. "We made mistakes," he said simply. "With you, with the business, with our priorities." The admission hung in the air like a fragile thing that might shatter if touched too roughly. "Yes," I agreed. "You did. Can you forgive us?" The question I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Forgiveness was complicated when the wounds were still tender, when trust had been broken so completely that even time couldn't fully heal it. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." "We don't expect you to forget," my mother said quickly. "We just hope, someday, there might be room for us in your life again." I looked at Alexander, drawing strength from his steady presence. He had given me the space to make this choice without influence or pressure, trusting me to know what I needed. "There's always been room," I said finally, but not as the people who tried to trade me for a business deal, only as parents who understand that I'm an adult capable of making my own decisions. The conversation was awkward and incomplete and painful in all the ways that real reconciliation usually is. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had separated us for 5 years. Walking out of the country club that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was forgiven or forgotten, but because I had stopped waiting for my parents to change and started becoming the person I wanted to be, regardless of their approval. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked as we drove home through the city streets. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. Finally, completely free. The war was over. Not because anyone had won or lost, but because I had finally stopped fighting battles that belonged to someone else's story. My life, my choices, my consequences. The most beautiful words in any language. 10 years later, Alexander and I have 3 children and 2 dogs and a life that looks nothing like the one my parents planned for me. Morrison Kane Development employs over 10,000 people and has built infrastructure across 6 states. Sometimes I drive past the building that used to house Morrison Construction's headquarters. It's a coffee shop now, filled with young professionals and college students planning their own rebellions against family expectations. I never regret the choice I made in my parents' living room that day. The champagne flute trembling in my hand, the emerald ring catching the light, the moment when I chose love over loyalty and freedom over fear. Because sometimes the most important promises you make aren't the ones you make to other people. Sometimes the most important promise you make is to yourself. The promise to choose happiness over obligation, authenticity over approval, and your own voice over the chorus of people who think they know what's best for you. The promise to be brave enough to disappoint the people you love if that's what it takes to become the person you're meant to be. That promise, I've kept every day since.